we are going into the understanding of the Mamluks. And this is a book called the Mamluk Ascari from 1250 to 1517. All books and videos that I will put in this video is all under the Fair Use Act, and we are using it for educational purposes only. We're going through history again, and we're looking through the history of the Israelites. And we know that we were scattered to all these different countries like South and Central, North America, parts of China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, India, Europe, Netherlands, and so forth, and all throughout Africa. What we fail to realize, although we have did studies in search of our forefathers to find out how we know where we're from, we talk about the Islamic slave trade, but a lot of us really don't indulge in the activities that we went through in captivity there. And so in this particular class, we're going to talk about such topics as the Mamluks, the Moors, the Saracens, and also the Zanj in Zanzibar, which is up in this area, Iraq, Syria, Jordan. This little area is where a lot of our people migrated to, and especially Jerusalem. All of this was considered the Kingdom of Jerusalem. You see? Libya, all the way to Cyrene. Remember when they came up against Stephen in Acts chapter 6, you had the Libertines, you had the Cyrenicians, which are all from Africa, right? And you had the Greeks. You had all these different factions of Israel coming up against Stephen in the book of Acts chapter 6. But we were all over the place. Okay, we were scattered by the Greeks and scattered by the Romans and various other places and by various nations. But today we're going to talk about the Mamluks, which were in this region. And they were kings, slave kings is what they called them. So we're just going to look at some photos, and we're going to look through some history, and we're going to find out how this impacted our walk through time. Going back into the Mamluk Studies Review, Volume 12. I want to show you, brothers and sisters, something in this book. For all of you who don't believe that Africa is in Israel, East Africa. This is page 134. Notice what it says at the bottom of this page. Particularly overturning the existing geographic order was the fact that the land bridge between the African and Asian hemisphere of Islam, the Sinai Peninsula, was successively sealed by the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So the Kingdom of Jerusalem covered the eastern side of Africa to the northern side of Africa, all the way to the Asian hemispheres, India and so forth. Okay? For you who don't believe that Israel's in Africa. This is Mamluk Ascari 1250 to 1517. Introduction. Mamluks, or Gulams as they were also called, are generally described by Western writers as slave soldiers. The rulers of the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and Syria and the comparable Delhi Sultanate of northern India are sometimes referred to as slave kings. However, the description reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the concept of slavery in medieval Islamic civilization. Here it is worth noting that the Mamluk Sultanate did not call itself such. Instead, one of its official names was Dalat al-Turkiya, the state of the Turks, which highlight the importance of their Turkish origins to the Mamluk ruling class, at least from the mid-13th to the mid-14th centuries. Slavery or bonded labor played a minor part in agriculture in Islamic lands. However, those of slave origin played a significant role in domestic life, the service of the elite, and of course, in the military. We're going to go through this understanding of the Mamluk dynasties and who were these Mamluks. These Mamluks, again, were considered to be called slave soldiers or slave kings. And we're going to find out why. We're going to page 19 of this book. In 1499, the Mamluk governor of Damascus found himself so short of troops that he assumed authority over all black slaves in the city, trained them as soldiers, and formed them into military units, which proved remarkably effective. A few years later, the Mamluk Sultan raised a force of handgunners, many of the black African origins. However, they were away fighting the Portuguese in the Red Sea and Yemen when the Ottomans attacked in 1517, leaving only a small corps of North African and Turkmen arquebusiers to defend Egypt. Now this is playing a major role in history because we noticed during the early 1600s is when slavery took place on the west coast of Africa. So this was 100 years before Europe, the Portuguese, Spain, and even parts of Rome were fighting against soldiers that were black slaves, as well as the Mongols they were fighting against black slaves from the Arab lands. This is part of our history that we haven't heard too much about, but we were called Mamluks, slave kings.
West to east, across the heart of Africa to Arabia. This is the great highway of slavery.
We're going to go into this book, The Legacy of Arab Islam in Africa, a quest for interreligious dialogue. I've used this as a resource with several documentaries that I've done. We're going to go to the top here, page 158, and it reads, a good percentage of black slaves were used in plantation farming. Some of these include the indigo, sugar, and cotton plantations of the 18th century, northern Sudan, and the clove plantation of Zanzibar. The jihadist Emirates of western and central Sudan also employ a vast number of slaves in large-scale agricultural farming. We're going to go through this book. It's called The Jews of Arab Lands in Modern Times. This was published in 1945 by the Library of Congress, Cataloging and Publication Data. Stillman, Norman A., 1945, as you can see. We're going to go to page 216. And we're going into this book because he mentioned Central Sudan and the Arab Emirates controlling a lot of that and preventing a lot of the men from going into the military. So let's read this. It reads, I interrogated the rabbi in regard to the beginnings of the Jewish settlements in this cave country. Savage invasions and devastating wars, replied the rabbi, have robbed them of their ancient documents. There are in the district numbers villages where one may find traces of deserted haras and of Jewish cemeteries now abandoned or Israelite territories. The ancestors of the Jews of the cave country have transmitted the tradition that in very ancient times the Jews formed the majority of the population, but that wars and epidemics decimated their numbers. And we'll see this looking at parts of North Africa and parts of the Kingdom of Jerusalem territory. This is what happened. The Muslims came in and decimated, and the Crusaders decimated the lands of Israel along with the people. There were, moreover, frequent conversions to Islamism for many generations. So that should ring a bell right there, that a lot of our brothers became Islamic or secret Jews. And in addition, as a result of the frightful epidemics, a large part of the Jewish population of the recent generations had preferred to leave the Garian in order to settle in the oasis on the coast of Tripoli, that's North Africa. So a lot of our people became Muslim. And this was the same thing going on during the time of the Mamluks. This is page 217. It reads, "A number of the men present spoke with me on the precarious position of the Jews of the Sahara. They complained of the arbitrary treatment which the minor Turkish officials mete out to them on every occasion." So they was getting treated and mishandled. Remember I said the Turks and the African slaves didn't get along? It says, "Of the humiliating attitude of the neighbor Muslims, who are one of the most degenerate races it has ever been my lot to meet. Their complaints were biggest against the Askaria duty." Remember the Mamluk Askaria? This means military, the Mamluk military. "A tax for exemption from military service, which the Jews are forced to pay in kind in a country where the natives are excused from army service. The Mamluks were not native Arabs. Most of them were of other nationalities, mainly of Africans, which were Bantu, and some of them were Neolithic or Hamites. So you had the Jews and the Hamites working within the Arabs' armies. While they were pouring out their complaints to me, an Arab who had just come from Kasar-Garian, Turkish fort and administrative center, thrust himself into our conversation and announced solemnly that at that very moment, an order had arrived from Constantinople, exempting the Jews from the Askaria, the military, in all countries where the Muslims are not subject to military service. See that? So a lot was going on during the times of the Mamluks, and even after the times of the Mamluks. And this was in Central Sudan. Let's jump over to page 218. The arrival of a new personage put an end to this scene. A Jewish or Israelite itinerant merchant from Nafusa, returning from Fezin, gave me some very lively details of the mode of living and of trading of the Israelite itinerant merchants, who follow all the routes of the Sahara and face all the dangers which infest them. As for the Jews of the southern Sahara and of the Sudan, he did not remember ever having met them, but he assured me that there exists, at least in the East Sudan, a black-skinned population which some call the Felici. So these were the Jews, their nickname was Felici, or heavenly, and which are generally known among the Turks as the Crete. If you look up the Crete were black people with nappy woolly hair. They observe the Sabbath and are known to be of Jewish origin. See that? But notice it says here, a black-skinned population. Not white, a black-skinned population. These were Jews. So these Jews became slaves in the Mamluk military. Going back to the legacy of Arab Islam in Africa, just to prove to you that what we was just reading in the last book is dealing with Israelites who became slaves. They had to become exempt in order to get freed from this captivity in certain parts of Africa. These are the ones who could not get exempt. This book, you'll notice that this is talking about black slaves, but it doesn't give you the details that these were Jews. So you have to pretty much search for the clues regarding that. And these books all go hand in hand. And if you read it for face value, you won't figure it out unless you get references from other books. And this is how we understand this puzzle. This is page 163. It reads, within tropical Africa itself, Muslim states and communities use slaves extensively in peasant and large-scale agricultural production, just like we read. The condition of slaves throughout such Muslim communities was anything but mild. This is why the Jews couldn't stand the Arabs. In 1820, René Callier reported numerous slave-based plantations in the Senegabian region where slaves lived in several small slave villages. Callier accompanied one of the Muslim hosts of his rice plantation and described the condition of the slave workers in the following words. The poorest slaves work entirely naked, exposed to the heat of the burning sun. The presence of the master intimidates them, and the fear of punishment expedites the work. The women who had little clothing had their children tied to their backs. In Zanzibar, just like we read in the Mamluk Askari book, in Zanzibar, it is well known that the slaves who advanced in age or became ill and were of no economic value were left to fend for themselves, and most of them ended up destitute and starved to death. Some were brutally killed by their masters. We're reading this, and this is stemming from, as we read, the 19th, 20th century, all the way back to 1250, 1517. The Zanj come from Zanzibar, and this is where it talks about the Jews. It doesn't say Jews here, but it talks about 500 to 5,000 of the slaves were in salt marshes in southern Iraq. See that? Those were Israelites. We've already proven that.
Turn home. Others remained because the head of their tribe or their relatives had sold them without their knowledge to merchants disguised as Islamic missionaries. But many more simply had stepped forward to meet their fate with the full consciousness of what lay ahead for them. Slavery in the land of the prophet being preferable to a miserable existence in an African village.
All right, we're going to go into this book. It's called The Argonaut Press, Itinerary of Ludovica di Varthema of Bologna. This was republished in 1970. It's dealing with the dates 1502 to 1508. So this is towards the end of the Mamluk Askari. So as we read in the last book, how the Mamluks decimated the lands of the Jews and made them slaves. So now we're going to read about during this time period, if there were still any Jews left in those mountain areas. We're going to go to the discourse, page 31. We're going to start right in the middle of this page with Warthema. Gives a long account of Damascus, in which I resided some months in order to learn the Moorish, example, the Arabic language. He did not leave it till April 1503. You guys all know who the Moors are. He finds the city entirely inhabited by Moors, blacks, and Mamluks, and many Greek Christians. Okay, remember we had the Hellenic Christians. Some of these Greek Christians, also Edomites. And the Mamluks he described as renegade Christians who have been purchased by the said Lord, example, by the Mamluk governor of Damascus. So we're going back to Jerusalem, Damascus area. So we're going back to the Mamluk in Ascari, 1250, 1517. We're going to go to the dress code of the Mamluks. This is page 29. Now, these are the dress codes of the Mamluks. Notice the red cap. Different types of red caps. Even this one. See that? It's all part of the Mamluks. See the turban? These are different styles of Mamluk turbans. This is a man's wife, and that's him entering the room. Had their beard a certain way, had their hat a certain way. Even their shoes. Red cap, red turban. Let's look at this one. Let's see if we can find this on the brother. And the image of the black in Western art. And we are on page 38, and the title of this one is called Stable Lad Holding a Brown Horse by the Reins. All right. Now look at this brother. The hat that we saw earlier is the same hat that this brother has on. This is something that the Mamluk slaves had. Look at the attire. He's preparing this horse. If you don't believe me, let me hold it closer. Okay, here's that hat. Here's this hat. These are the Mamluks, aka the Jews who were in the land of Islam. See that? See that? But we still haven't talked about what the red symbolizes. We're going to get to that too. Interesting, right? Now we're going to find out if this gentleman, is really a Mamluk. Because you may say, well, you're just making this up. This is just a coincidence. But we're going to go to the insert where it says 22. I'm going to flip the page over to page 37. And it reads here, there's 22. It says, Lagazi's stable lad holding a brown horse by the reins is clearly black. He wears a conical red cap with long tufts, the Mamluk Zant, red trousers, and a white kaftan tucked into a green belt. He also carries a saddle cloth under his arm, in this case red and with embroidery. However, Lagazi based his figure not on a woodcut, but on one of the manuscripts with Turkish figures. This is confirmed by the inscription on his drawing indicating that he is a groom. Et aglan, sono gli servitorio da stalla. Okay, I don't read Italian. But this is basically telling you that this brother right here is a Mamluk with a red cap. He's a Mamluk. And where did the Mamluks come from? West Africa. And where did they run from? From the Reconquista? From Spain and Portugal to become either slaves or citizens or in the infantry of the military. Here's another one. Same skull as we just saw before. There's a brother. Okay, he is a Mamluk. A black groom drawing from a costume book. See that? 12 Jerusalem, LA. Mayor Museum Institute for Islam Art. These brothers also dwelt in Israel. Coincidence, right? Okay, we're going to go deeper into it. This is a book called The Ottomans and the Mamluks. Imperial Diplomacy and Warfare in the Islamic World. This was written by Sihan Yoksol Muslim. This book was published in 2014. This book, and we're going to go to page 14. And we're going to drop down to the bottom paragraph. Let's start right here where it says the Muslim presence. The Muslim presence in the Iberian Peninsula had been gradually established since the first waves of Muslim attacks in the early 8th century and had lasted under different Muslim powers until 1492. This is when the Portuguese and the Spaniards went to South America. It reads, the Reconquista not only seized the kingdom of Granada, which was in Spain, this is where the Israelites dwelt, the final territory that remained in the hands of the Muslim Nasrid rulers, but also led to the expulsion of most of the Jewish and Muslim populations from the area. These attacks did not entirely end the presence of either group in the peninsula, but they did begin a process of gradual assimilation and expulsion that lasted at least until the 17th century. The expulsion of Jews and Muslims under the rule of Ferdinand and Isabella was not an isolated incident. So now you're going to see the puzzle coming together, because we've heard about the Spaniard and the Portuguese Reconquista, and we've heard about us being in West Africa. We heard about us being in Jerusalem, but now we're about to hear the other side of the story, which is the Muslim side of the story. The Portuguese King Damayo I, 1495 to 1521, issued a similar decree in 1496 under pressure from the Spanish Habsburg royal family. Expelled Jewish and Muslim communities arrived in Ottoman and Mamluk territories in waves. Very important. While some also found safe haven in North Africa. This population movement not only changed the social makeup of the Ottoman and the Mamluk society, but also influenced the politics of both powers. Additionally, the Nasrids of Granada and the Hafsids of Tunis turned to both the Ottoman and Mamluks for assistance against the powers of the Reconquista. So what you had was our people leaving Portugal, leaving France, leaving Spain, all that Iberian Peninsula. They were running back to North Africa, and also they were running back to Israel, where they joined forces with the Mamluks and the Ottoman Empire, and they wanted to fight against Spain and Portugal. This is why the Portuguese and the Spaniards took us all the way over into West Africa and took us all the way into the Americas so they wouldn't be conquered. So now you see the puzzle coming together. This is a book called Source of History in the Pentateuch by Samuel C. Bartlett. We're going to go to the inner page of this book, page 118, History in the Pentateuch. We're going to jump down to the second paragraph. It reads, in regard to the human race, it has been shown abundantly and historically that each of the external differences often cease to be characteristic. Thus, the black color is found not only in individuals as the black Jews of Portugal, but in tribes as Topicaries on the Red Sea, whose hair and character are perfectly Semitic. So now we're seeing that these people that were in the Iberian Peninsula that were affected by the Reconquista went back to meet and join their brethren. They wanted to go and join their brethren who were in the Mamluk empires and the Ottoman Turk empires. Now it's starting to come together. All right, so I'm going to go to this book. It's called Africa, being an accurate description of the regions of Egypt, Barbary, Libya. This is John Ogilvy. I'm going to go to page 34. It reads here, many Jews also are scattered over this region, some natives, boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides the river Niger. Others are Asian strangers who fled thither, either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian, or from Judea, wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe, whence they were banished, out of some parts of Italy in the year 1342, out of Spain in the year 1462, which we had read about earlier, out of the Low Countries in 1350, that's the Netherlands, out of France in 1403, out of England in 1422. These all differ in habit and are divided into several tribes, having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised of all nations, and so abominated by the Turks, as we read earlier about the Turks, that they looked upon the Turks as infidels, and so abominated by the Turks that they are not admitted to be Mohammedans unless first baptized, and then no otherwise made use of than to receive their customs and gather in their taxes. So those who were baptized as Mohammedans actually were exempt from paying taxes. They Kafirs or libertines who hold many ecclesiastical tenets live together promiscuously without ceremonies, like our families or Edomites, following their sensuality and unbridled lust, inhabiting from Mozambique to the Cape of Good Hope. Remember in Acts chapter 6, the libertines and the Cyrenians came against Stephen. We're going to go into the Bible. This is Acts chapter 6, verse 8. And Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. Then there arose certain of the synagogue, which is called the synagogue of the Libertines, the Cyrenians, and Alexandrians, and of them of Cilicia, and of Asia, disputing with Stephen. And they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. So as you can see right here, these same people were in Africa. The Libertines, the Cyrenians, the Alexandrians, and the Cilicia, and the brothers from Asia. All of these were black men. All of them, which you would probably call African men today, but they were all Semitic black men. So you see their customs, they don't keep no laws. They live off their lust. It says, the idolaters are numerous in Negro land, Upper and Lower Ethiopia, and towards the great ocean, except, as we hinted before, some few who by the industry of the Portuguese and Spaniards have been converted and baptized in several places. Right? Baptized to what? Christianity and Islam. Let's go to some. Some of them are non-conformists, living uncontrolled and without laws, talking about the Mohammedans, nor acknowledging any principality, having their meeting places in the wilderness of Libya, Barca, and Beldogerid. Those of Morocco, Fez, and some Ethiopian people have their kings, whereas the inhabitants of Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, and Egypt are governed by deputies and lieutenants, that is, Turkish basas, Turkish masters. Here's the history that they were scattered, that they were expulsed out of the lands of Europe and out of Jerusalem, into Africa and into the Americas, and eventually some went back to Jerusalem, immigrated back to Jerusalem where they were originally from, and made a home in the mountains. Now I want you to keep in mind that all did not believe that way. Some became Mamluks, some wanted to stay within their heritage of being Jews. So you will see in history that some held fast to their beliefs and others became crypto-Jews and became Muslim, as we will read. Let's drop to page 33 and let's start here, the caravan. It says here, the caravan wandered on for another 8 days, and by the 7th of May, it may be presumed it found a mountain which appeared to be 10 or 12 miles in circumference, in which mountain there dwell 4 or 5,000 Jews, who were clad and colored like Bedouins, Arabs, Badawi. These are dark black Arabs. These are not actual Arabs, but these are people who dwell in that land who became Arabs. But you see what it says. It says they were Jews, but they looked like Bedouin Arabs, but they were not Arabs, and are described as being possessed of a fanatical hatred of all Arabs. Why would the Arabs hate the Arabs? You see? Why would the Arabs? It doesn't make sense. So this is Ishmael, and this is Israel. This is Ishmael, the Arabs that they hated, and the ones that were considered to be Jews were Israelites. And they had reason. Their habitation was the Calabar oasis to the north of Medina, and its name, he said, to be taken from a Hebrew word, kabar, a castle. The Jewish inhabitants noted by Wartherman were probably originally refugees from the north, in consequence of the many persecutions they met with the hands of enemies of all kinds. This is when they fled from Portugal, they fled from France, they fled from Italy. Okay? These were African Americans, so you can understand. These were black people, so you can understand. They were all Israelite people. They are first heard of in AD 568, and are mentioned by Abu Faraq Ali in the Aghdad of Songs of the 10th century. Let's go to another page. All right, so now I'm on page 14 of the same book. And we're going to drop down to the bottom because the Mamluks were on a hunt. The Mamluks were Moors, right? These were slave kings, Mamluks, versus what the Moors were. At the end of the 8 days, we found a mountain Calabar, which appeared to be 10 or 12 miles in circumference, in which mountain there dwell 4,000 or 5,000 Jews who go naked and are in height 5 or 6 spans and have a feminine voice. So these were 5 feet to 6 feet tall Jew men, okay, black men, and have a feminine voice and are more black than any other color. Okay, so that's letting you know right there they weren't Arabs. They live entirely upon the flesh of sheep and eat nothing else. They are circumcised and confess that they are Jews. And if they can get a Moor into their hands, they skin him alive. Why would they skin another brother, a black brother, alive? Because they gave up the faith. They became Islamic. They left their first love. They were traitors. They were enemies of the faith. That's why they said they skin them alive. Plus, they killed their family members. They were worse than enemies, but they were our brothers. As the foot of the said mountain, we found a tank of water, which is water that falls in the rainy season. We loaded with the said water 16,000 camels, whereas the Jews were ill pleased, and they went about the mountain like wild goats. And on no account would they descend into the plain, because they are mortal enemies of the Moors. See that? So these are Jews who never gave up the faith, who refused to become Mamluks, who refused to follow the faith of Islam, who refused to become Christians. This is why they dwelt in the mountains, in cave mountains. So these are the slaves that the Mamluk Askari was talking about. This is page 158. I'm going to read the second paragraph, and it says, male black slaves were recruited into infantry drills, a generally inferior role to that of cavalry, staffed by the Mamluks. Slaves are mainly Turkish origin. Turkish military slaves became the best cavalry, and the best cavalry were Turkish military slaves. Africans were considered inferior to the Turks. So there was always a problem with the African Muslim slaves or African Muslim soldiers and the actual Turks. Never got along, even though we were on the same side, or according to them, we were on the same side. They were also stereotyped as infantry, which was inferior to cavalry. Therefore, African military slaves by color and occupation were considered of less importance than Turks. Turks came after we did the battle. After we slayed all the enemies, then the Turks, which were the white Turks, this is when they came running in, acting like they were doing something, but it was really the infantry slaves, military slaves, that did all the work. Africans were considered inferior to Turks. They were also stereotyped as infantry, which was inferior to cavalry. Therefore, African military slaves by color and occupation were considered of less importance than Turks. It was in this stereotype role that thousands of black slaves perished in battles during succession-related feuds and interracial feuds with their Berber and Turkish counterparts. Mention is made of the employment of black slaves as soldiers in considerable numbers at various times in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and India. So we were all over the Middle East fighting for these Muslim. Not only that, we were fighting against each other in all these different feuds. Muslims against Jews, against Christians, Muslims against Jews, against Christians. We were all brothers, but all in different religions and not staying true to the covenants of our fathers. The first recorded use of black slaves in Aqaba Tunisia, and this is all in Africa, where they were used as special courts by the ruling dynasty in the early 9th century to counterbalance the threat of Arab troops. Numerous black slave soldiers caught up in the bloody feuds of medieval Muslim North African rule were at various times slaughtered by the victorious parties. It was in this role that one or two of the offsprings of black concubines took over the reins of power in Muslim North Africa and Muslim India, where the role of black African slaves in warfare and politics in the period of 1400 to 1700 was considerable. And this is where you get the women stepping up after the men were either killed or taken off into slavery or used as infantrymen. This is when the women stepped up. There was no one to defend them. A significant proportion, we're going to page 159. A significant proportion of male black slaves were castrated and used in Muslim lands as eunuchs to guard the harems and serve as attendants at holy sites such as the Kaaba at Mecca and the Prophet's Mosque in Medina. So we held high positions. But the only men that were castrated, the East Indians were not castrated. The Circassians coming from Europe were not castrated. The only men that were castrated were those who came from Takur of West Africa, which is also known as Ghana. We were the only ones that got castrated for fear of repopulating the place or sleeping with the enemy's women. So it says here, they formed a special class of highly priced slaves kept by Muslim rulers and bourgeois from the heart of the Muslim world to Muslim Africa.
We are permitted to film the pupils as they come out of the royal school. More than 100, we are told, are children of the sovereign himself. Following them are the children of the princes and high dignitaries. They're clean, well-disciplined, happy children. But note that some of them do not carry books. These are children of the oil-rich. Their books are carried by their personal slaves. Slaves received as gifts from their parents on their birthdays. Slaves who will grow up alongside their masters and serve as their personal gods. Most of these are children of palace slaves, and according to the law, they too are slaves.
Ethiopia was for a very long time the main source of eunuchs for the Muslim world, even though from the mid-18th century, Bulgaria became the main exporter. So this is not talking about the Ethiopian people. Africa was considered Ethiopia. And we as a people from West Africa were called Ethiopians as well. I have a book that I can actually bring out to show you. That's what they called us. The operation done on boys aged between 8 and 10, though prohibited under Islam, was carried out with an exceeding high death rate. You think about the castration of the boys and the men, and you think about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were all castrated. And this was a symbol that they did with certain people, as you can see right here. They only did this with the West African boys and men. They did not do this to the East Indians. They did not do this to the so-called white people from the north. They only did it to the West Africans, or what we call the Israelites. This shows you that we are the same people. It says, the operation done on boys aged between 8 and 10, though prohibited under Islam, was carried out with an exceeding high death rate. Gustav Nachtigal was told that on the whole, about 30% survived the operation in Bagarmi, while other estimates put the mortality rate at up to 80%. So we're losing a lot of young men. This barbaric act was made particularly cruel for black victims in that, in contrast to the white counterparts, whose operation did not deny them the ability to perform coitus. The castration of blacks involved what was popularly referred to as a level with the abdomen. Example, a complete amputation of the genitalia. See that? Some of the eunuchs came to hold positions of influence, and it was indeed only in their capacity as eunuchs that black slaves, unlike their white counterparts, were sometimes able to play political and judicial roles of some importance in Muslim lands. Hence, in the words of J. O. Hunwick, brothers who were castrated, their only motivation was to have power because they couldn't have families, they couldn't have pleasure sexually, so the only thing that they had was to gain power to help their people. Since we know that most of these Mamluks were immigrants or were taken against their will into these lands of the Arab world, what happened to them? Let's read here on page 30. I'm going to jump down to the maybe fourth paragraph. It says, in the 14th and 15th century, the Mamluks faced a terrifying new threat, to which they were particularly exposed. The plague swept across the lands, and it is clear that the Mamluk class suffered more seriously than other sections of society. Newly arrived foreigners and children were hit worse because they had not built up the same immunities as the local population. In the epidemic of 1458 through 60, about 1/3 of registered Mamluks died. See that? So a lot of the Mamluks that were new to the land in the 14th and 15th century, they died due to that plague that swept through. Plus, they were getting castrated. They had a lot of things against them. They weren't used to the new climate where they were living. Things changed, okay? So they lost a lot of infantry from the 14th and 15th centuries. But the time of their reign was during the late 13th century. All right, let's get some more information on the Mamluks.